Drunken Bibliophile here. I'm going to be reviewing this book, Daniel Suarez's Daemon, written in 2009. It's a techno thriller. Self-published, my understanding is. He couldn't find a publisher, so he published it himself. I don't know why he couldn't find a publisher. The book is excellent. I'm going to do this one a little different. I'm going to do it in 3 parts. Now, this book here, it's about 617 pages, give or take, and it's already divided up into 3 parts. The first part is what I'm going to do today, and it takes up about half the book. The second part I'm going to do in a different video, and it's going to be parts 2 and 3. And the third part is actually a sequel to this book called Freedom, with a little trademark symbol. So that's how my intention is to do this one. So as usual, there's going to be spoilers. I'm going to give you the entire plot and let you know what I think about it at the end. So part 1, let's start with that. We start out with Matthew Sobel's obituary. It lists his, Matthew Sobel, PhD, co-founder of Cyberstorm and creator of the very popular games Over the Rhine and The Gate. And those are kind of the equivalent in this book world of, like Call of Duty and World of Warcraft. Basically, he created the 2 most popular games in the world, massive multiplayer online RPGs, and he got phenomenally rich off of it, and he dies of a brain tumor. Now, that's the opening text, and the story starts with a man by the name of Joseph Pavlos dying on some back road. Kind of describes he was riding his motorcycle one minute, the next minute he's just got some horrible neck wound, blood spurting out of his neck. While the police obviously show up and investigate this when the body's found, and that's where we're introduced to Detective Sergeant Pete Sebick. He's just investigating the death. While they're reviewing kind of some of the footage and stuff like that, basically they find out somebody had put in a work order months before to have a winch installed, and then earlier that morning somebody had got another work order to turn that winch on. Then this guy was driving down the road and it activated the winch, and this steel cable came up and, right at neck level. So obviously it was made for somebody riding a motorcycle. So it's later, we'll get into all this later. The work order, which is actually kind of important, was actually sent from, was proxied from one location. They traced it back to a different location from one of the, companies that Cyberstorm owns, but the name on it was Chopra Singh was the guy who put in the work order, allegedly. Nobody really thinks it was him. Everything looks kind of spoofed. But while they are reviewing some evidence back at their station, they get another call over the radio about another death, and they recognize the address as Cyberstorm. And they recognize the name when they get there of Chopra Singh is this other death. He was electrocuted while going through a doorway. Now again, later on we find out that there was work orders put in that installed very specific equipment, kind of outside of what the designers and engineers and building maintenance would have normally done. And it turns out like they were geared towards these specific individuals. So there's a hot wire ran directly to the door frame, but it was only activated when Chopra Singh himself scanned his card. And he had gone through that doorway 100 times, and they later find out it's because it was waiting until Matthew Sobel, the co-founder of Cyberstorm, died, and his obituary went up. The next person we're introduced to is Brian Gregg. He's a hacker. He goes by the name Loki. He's really a terrible person, like on just about every level. He steals IDs for a living. He hacks into systems and just kind of lives an entirely fake life. But we meet him. He's planning a rave, and he's got a meeting with some Filipino contacts to sell some IDs to. allegedly. But he's got to go pick up some new crypto key or something that they got for him. He's enlists his friend Jason, his literal partner in literal crime. But first, they're setting up a rave that they, that's his side business. He makes his money off of. So they go to the rave, and while they're there, he's a really shady guy. He doesn't do drugs. That's not his thing, but he does feed drugs to a young girl and kind of manipulates her and her date to come backstage with him. Coerces her to, strip in front of the entire crowd. And then she ends up performing oral sex on him in public. And he's also live streaming that to a porn site, so he's making extra money off of it. Then after he's finished, kind of explains this is how he gets off. It's his power trip. He just kind of tosses her to the crowd, so his date's just, second, maybe third in line to go at it. Him and his friend go out to meet the Filipinos afterwards. It turns out he had tried hacking into the Filipino database. They somehow found out it was him. It was probably the same thing that's been going on with everybody else, which I'll explain here in a minute. But he sets his friend up. He kind of figures what's going on. He sets his friend up. He's kind of drunk and high and all that. He's like, hey, man, go do this thing for me. Hurry up. I'm carrying all the weight here. Just go pick up this code and we'll be gone. As soon as the guy's gone, he gets out of the car and hides. Turns out the Filipinos take this guy up, tie him up, beat him to death, and leave him as a message for anybody else. Now we get to John Ross. We'll skip over to that. John Ross is he's a computer consultant. He basically is his own private corporation. He just registers a corporation. He has a list of clients, and he goes around helping with computer stuff. He's pretty sharp with computers, is his thing. The reason he comes up is because basically the guy who got electrocuted, Chopra Singh, was going into the server room. When they start looking at the servers, they realize the servers were doing some funny things, and they trace that back to this firm, Alcyon, that John Ross worked at, and it turns out that computer was doing some weird stuff, and John Ross was working on trying to fix it, but he comes under suspicion because he doesn't have a permanent address. He travels around a lot. They just think he's kind of shady, even though he's really got a lot. He's mostly he's mostly on the up and up. We'll find out more about that later. Now, Angie Anderson comes next. She's a kind of a fluff piece reporter for some local news station in not Thousand Oaks, where most of this is taking place so far, but kind of the surrounding area, LA or whatever. She's fired when we meet her. She gets to the gate, they won't let her in, her access is denied, she's cussing and stomping, signs some papers, it basically says, yeah, okay, I'm terminated, gotcha. But right after that, she calls her agent. Her agent has no idea what's going on. And then she gets a recorded message, like one of the auto calls, like one of the recorded messages you get when you call up a bank or something, that keeps offering her job, and she's just taking it as a joke or, a prank, so she keeps hanging up. And it finally tells her, hey, you're going to see something huge pretty soon, and you could have had this, but now, next time you'll listen. So, the bottom line is, there is something working in the background. The computer that was doing weird stuff was actually sending off little packets of data, thousands of them all around the world. And it was triggered by the Matthew Sobel obituary. Basically, he had written a lot of little programs. They're called demons. And I have the definition right here. A demon in the computer world is a computer program that runs continuously in the background and performs specified operations at predefined times or in response to certain events. So, basically, then one of the demons was, hey, when my obituary pops up, send off the rest of these demons. And it's basically a massively paralleled program that each one does one simple thing, but they add up to basically a a type of artificial intelligence. So Matthew Sobel is doing all this from beyond the grave. Well, one of the things that they're trying to do, once they start figuring out that this is a thing, it kind of announces itself like that, is they decide, the FBI, the local police, everybody, 2 people are dead, hey, let's go find out what's on his servers at his house, and he lives in his mansion. Well, they go on there, and it doesn't go well. They have a 3-man breaching team that go in. They are assaulted by, basically, they're hearing voices coming out of nowhere. It sounds like ghosts and people walking around who obviously aren't there. And it turns out it's all directed microphones, super high-tech stuff, but, Matthew Sobel's spending his fortune on whimsical things that he's dying, he doesn't have to worry about a profit. So, one of the things he spent his money on was acoustical weaponry. So, he hits these guys as soon as they come in the house, he just drills them with some type of special frequency weapon that, their eyes are bleeding, their ears are bleeding, their noses are bleeding, they're puking and defecating on themselves, and they crawl out. They're just trying to get away. So they're trying to exfil these guys when another little surprise that Matt Sobel had set up, a Humvee that is AI controlled. It's basically a remote controlled Humvee, but it's all being controlled by computer and sensors and things like that. That's basically run off of the same kind of AI programming that his game characters run off of. This thing just is mowing down people. It's running over cops and FBI agents and smashing through cars and everything else. Basically, it kills like 6 people, critically injures like 9 more. Everybody pulls back, and they can't really do anything to it. They can't shoot the driver. There's nobody there. Right. So, it makes big news, and that's kind of where Angie Anderson was like, her phone rings, hey, turn on the news, this is what you missed. So now she's going to start listening a little bit more. So she's being recruited to basically become his eyes and ears sort of thing. Well, more like a press agent, I guess, for the Demon. She's going to kind of persecute who she wants to, what the Demon wants persecuted, and, kind of drive his narrative for him, or it. So they decide to go ahead and gear up. Like a line was drawn in the sand, videos were released. Matt Sobel said, don't come into my mansion for 30 days. And they're like, well, now we have to. So they gear up with the second assault. It's the character we're going to focus on here, his name is Roy Tripwire Merritt. Him and his team are a hostage rescue team. Pretty elite guys. They are tasked with breaching the house. Now, they've already had robots go in, and they already know there's a bunch of traps, there's pitfalls, sound weaponry, stuff like that. These guys, well, first of all, somebody comes up with a 50 caliber sniper rifle, takes out the Humvee, boom, boom, boom. Then takes out the generator that's running the house because they tried to cut power to it, and the generator's kicked on. Shoot the generator, through a wall. Yes, it is what it is. So the Hummer's down, the power's out. These guys decide to go in. Well, they're halfway there, and somebody's kind of realizing, oh, this guy was researching alternative power supplies. Right then, some weird shit kicks on. His whole mansion has power again, and the sprinklers kick on. Not a big deal till they realize the sprinklers are kicking out gasoline. And then it lights on fire. Roy Merritt had gone ahead to try to keep his team safe. He was just kind of keeping a lookout. So they kind of concentrated on his team, and they burned to death. He gets really upset, breaches the house. The acoustic weapons, he just starts shooting the speakers out. I mean, he just tries a lot of really cool stuff. The acoustic weapons, he just shoots the speakers. Then it started flooding the place with water and then arcing electricity into it to try to electrocute him. And he's like punching holes in the wall to like climb through. Genuinely impressive stuff, like maneuvering past all the trap doors and whatnot. Finally gets to where the server room's at. Barely making it, like he's all burnt up anyway. Injured, almost out of ammo, but he takes all his flashbangs and some breaching tools and throws it down this pit that's...
Power off.
throws it down in this pit that's leaking, that goes down to the server room, blows a hole in it, and then the whole house just, like, literally a voice says, "Oh, the server room's been breached. We're going to self-destruct now. No countdown." So he's like, the whole house starts, like the sprinkler system in the house starts spraying out gasoline. He's, like, trying to run to get out. Ends up falling into a pit that he didn't see before. Luckily, it's full of water. The house just engulfed in flames. He's rescued later, it turns out. You know, at that point in the story, you think he's dead, but they ended up rescuing him later, but he's critically injured. Right. So, after the entire Filipino incident with Greg, a.k.a. Loki, he was laying low for a while. He didn't know how breached his cover was. Like, none of them really knew who he was, but he didn't want to take the chance. He's been spending a lot of time playing Over the Rhine. Remember that? That's one of the games Matthew Sobel designed. And he sees that there's a special map that wasn't on there before. He really loves the game. This is an exceptionally challenging map. It says a lot about his character that he really likes. He normally plays as the Nazis. That's his preferred go-to guys. But this map won't let him. And the Nazis just mowing his team down. They finally have to get like a coordinated effort, really get into it. Finally, after days, they finally breached this whole castle called Monte Cassino is the name of the map. It's some Italian campaign in World War II. They finally breach it, and they actually go twice. The first time he gets killed, he gets shot in the back by one of the characters, a very famous character in the game called Berner. So he goes to it again, finally makes it again. He actually kills or not half, but he kills a few members of his team to collect like extra health so he can get down there. He gets down there, and Berner's waiting there. He can't be killed, but Berner's no longer attacking him. Then he realizes, basically it's this AI program, this demon that's telling him through the game, "Oh, you have some skill." And then there's pictographic code that's written there, some random series of numbers and letters that says, "Yeah, if you can decode this, then you'll know what to do next." So he does end up doing that. It takes him a few days. He realizes that, he figures it out. It's not important how. Well, yeah, it's not important how. He figures it out, which directs him to some coordinates. He goes there. There's a building, like a little concrete shack. He has to hack into a bunch of other stuff. This is basically a series of tests to test his skill. Once he does end up passing all the tests, they ask him some questions. He's got to sit like with an eyepiece on and a heart rate monitor and whatever, like all this specialty equipment that's made to read his emotional state. And it basically tells him, answer honestly. We don't care like what the views are as long as you're honest. So he is honest, and basically, yeah, I got some issues, and I'm a messed up person. I'm not very good, but he passes. Gets led into like a lower sanctum for it. And there's a hologram of Matthew Sobel who basically says, "You're the son I always wanted." And he's going to teach him a bunch of stuff. We're going to leave him off from there because he basically passed, and he's the founder of a guild, is literally what's described. Now, at this point, the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, all these people, and Sebek are all going to the funeral for Matthew Sobel. They show up at the funeral. Nobody's there. It's just a dead body of Matthew Sobel and a bunch of federal agents. While they're there, Sebek gets a phone call. He's looking at his phone, answers it, and it's a recording of Matthew Sobel, calling him out by name, saying that, "Sorry, they need a sacrifice, and you're it. You're going to have to die." And then he gives him some instructions. Says, "Call me out by name before you die, and I'll intervene. But either way, you have to die." So nobody knows what to make of it. But anyway, moving on, they decide to go investigate. Now, this is where Sebek and John Ross, they kind of hook up. They're helping to investigate this crime. So they link up together to try to see what's going on. they have to go into the game, the gate, because apparently a lot of the online stuff has been happening there. And, you know, there's a lot of big changes, and there's a new castle that showed up, and it's really weird and wonky. Sebek has no idea how to play. Ross is a professional gamer. That's what he does. Kind of showing him the ropes, and they teleport to this castle that just appeared the day Sobel died. They're like, oh yeah, hopefully from this distance we can just kind of observe, see what's going on. Nah, some huge evil avatar just pops up, calls out Sebek by his name, says, you know, what are you doing here? And then, like, casts his character out and fries his entire computer, and then blasts Ross's character to pieces. Kind of impressive in the sense that, you know, it's a video game doing that. So, they, Ross freaks out because he's doing this remotely. He goes down to the concierge desk or whatever at his hotel. He's worried that this is going to come back and they're going to trace him and find out who he is. He comes back, ends up, you know, ripping the router out or whatever. Like, he basically stops it from being traced back, even though he was definitely trying to, but he saves his ID from the demon, but gets arrested for it, and he calls Sebek. He's like, yeah, bail me out. Sebek comes, gets him out of jail, but is arrested. I mean, full-on arrest. Not like some guy was like, oh, you know, I recognize you. Nah, SWAT teams, helicopters, armored cars, all that stuff come. Gunpoint to arrest Sebek. There had been a setup where a woman that Sebek was having an affair on with his, you know, he's having an affair with his, with some girl. She was linked to Sobel as some investor in the medical part of his business. Then, and, you know, basically all the paperwork looked like he defrauded Sobel out of, like, hundreds of millions of dollars. Short stock, like, did some short stocks, really, like, it was a big, complicated swindle. And then by this point, you're getting the point that Sebek does not have that kind of savvy, underhandedness to him. He's not exactly a great guy, but he's not complicated or planning or conniving. But the evidence is compelling. He gets arrested, set on trial later on, and, you know, basically he's screwed. This is the sacrifice. Now Ross, they kind of question him. They've already questioned him, but it turns out after they release him that they're not. He's not who he says he is. He's an identity thief. They don't know exactly who he is, but he disappears completely. He has a pre-planned escape plan. Now, the important thing to remember is Angie Anderson during this is her career reboot. She is there for the exclusive when Sebek gets arrested. And, yeah, that's kind of her deal in. You know, the whole demon thing that was announced, that was a hoax set up by Sebek and his girlfriend. And, you know, he's a thief and a murderer and this and that. And everybody just kind of hates the most hated man in America. So, the last part of part one, which I'll get to, is you have the DIA, FBI, NSA, CIA. They're all having a meeting, and that's literally how it's listed. Just NSA says this, CIA says this. I don't know what the DIA is, but they're listed there too. They're going back and forth talking about, oh, you know, we finally got this Sebek character, and somebody's like, well, it doesn't sound right. Turns out that, you know, a lot of the evidence was he had a safe deposit box with a bunch of money and a fake passport, and, you know, his girlfriend, they had a trip to this same place where this woman was, and they said, well, you know, all these other detectives also had the exact same thing. So when they went searching, they found every detective who could have possibly been assigned to that case had the same exact setup. Basically, it was redundant plans in case somebody else got assigned. So then they realize kind of that the demon is not a hoax. It was not made by Sebek. But they also decide that for the interest of the world, Sebek he's going to be their scapegoat. and the demon's a hoax. That's what they're going to tell everybody. And that's the end of part 1. Now, that seemed like a lot of moving parts, and it is. It's a fairly convoluted story, but everything fits together really nice. Like I said, it's a techno thriller. His first book, for reading this site, it's just hard to believe that he hadn't written anything before. It's so well put together. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is this Chicago Sun-Times review on this book. And I realize these things are clipped and edited, so it's probably part of a larger thing. But it says, Daemon does for surfing the web what Jaws did for swimming in the ocean. That's not true. There's nobody who was on the internet, except for one time when John Ross thought he was being traced, that anybody was in any danger when surfing the web. They were just going about their lives, and this demon's pretty much almost helping them sometimes do that. Now, we're going to see later on, hopefully, it'll get more into, like, these are the basic bones of the characters. Some of these characters are already pre-developed. Ross, there's not really a whole lot of character development through this whole arc with him. Sebek, there is some. He's married with a kid, but he's cheating on her, and doesn't really like his wife, and doesn't get along with his son very well. But, over the course of this story, there is some development. Surprisingly, Greg, Loki, the hacker, it's not like he ever becomes a good person, but there is quite a bit of character development. It's really interesting, the path that he takes. Matthew Sobel is dead. There's no character development for him. He just kind of... his whole plan is eventually revealed. Like I said, that's a really interesting story. I don't want to get the full review, like my full opinion on the entire story, until I'm done with the series. So I'm going to do a couple more videos on this. Sorry, this one went a little long. And I was wondering, thank you, brother O'Mine, for leaving me the Steel Reserve. And also for suggesting I do this. I really enjoyed it. All right. Y'all, enjoy a good book. Enjoy a drink. Have a good night.